The multi-state outbreak of Salmonella Typhimurium infections linked to tomatoes. Let's start with the background information. Salmonella comes in two different forms, typhodal and non-typhodal. Salmonella Typhimurium is a non-typhodal form of Salmonella, which means it has a broad host range, meaning it can affect organisms such as animals and bacteria and not only humans. And it can also cause gastroenteritis, which is a stomach disease that causes diarrhea and inflammation. Why the problem exists? Salmonella infections usually always are caused through the digestion of raw or uncooked foods or food that is contaminated with bacterial things such as animal feces or unsanitary irrigation. How, where, and why the case happened. As of November 3, 2006, there were 183 cases reported with Salmonella Typhimurium from tomatoes. All of these cases came from states east of the Mississippi River, with the exception of two, but the subjects from both of those states were found to visit the Northeast during this time period. Most symptoms included fever and diarrhea, and 12% were put in the hospital. Since all the cases were in the Northeast area, it's easy to pinpoint that the infection came from tomatoes from a restaurant east of the Mississippi River. The demographics were 57% female and 43% male. The median age was 34 years old. When designing the solution, which was the destruction of a few local infected tomatoes, social factors such as visitation needed to be considered, such as how will the disposal of so many tomatoes affect businesses and people's everyday lives. Tomatoes are a pretty common vegetable, so it's something that would affect many people if the tomatoes were wiped out. The CDC is the main organization involved in the disposal of all these tomatoes. Their mission statement is to help and protect Americans from public health issues such as outbreaks, disease, and even security problems, and bring attention to all of these problems. The SWOT analysis includes the strength being technology, which gives the ability to track salmonella and where it comes from, such as finding that salmonella was coming from tomatoes at a certain restaurant. The weakness is that businesses and shoppers do extra to avoid getting contaminated tomatoes. Once word gets out that people are getting salmonella from tomatoes, it becomes pretty difficult for people to trust businesses and produce stores to buy their tomatoes from. Opportunities include a reason to evaluate imported foods more closely and keep everything clean. With the precautions needed to ensure that no other vegetable gets salmonella, people will start inspecting their food more often, which is something that people should have already been doing, but this just brings more light to the situation. The threat, which is destroying all the tomatoes. Some people might be paranoid about tomatoes being infected, such as homeowners, business owners, farm owners, so they might just go on a whim and get rid of all their tomatoes. Next step is to prioritize the issues. The root cause of the problem is the consumption of tomatoes that might not have gone through thorough oversight and have been grown with cleanliness. The core problems are while tomatoes are growing, they're not being grown with maximum cleanliness, which means raw foods are getting contaminated with manure, they're being grown with unclean water used during irrigation, or they're coming in contact with animal feces. And a lot of people put blind trust in restaurants as well, where these restaurants might not be cleaning their food the way they should be cleaning their food to avoid outbreaks such as this. And the distribution of already contaminated tomatoes, it's not exactly visible whether a tomato is contaminated or not, or so some people might just digest whatever was given to them. The solution of the case is that they would get rid of a certain contaminated group of tomatoes. They did not want to get rid of all the tomatoes because, again, that would affect a lot of people, as tomatoes are a very common everyday product for a lot of people. An alternative solution is to keep tomatoes at a certain temperature, due to studies showing that tomatoes stored in certain ways can get salmonella a lot faster than a lot of other tomatoes can. Another alternative solution is, when distributing, ensure a clean environment, so no cross-contamination from raw meats or other raw foods, or just anything dirty, basically. So up next is the 3 recommendations. These recommendations are all coming to conclusions on ways to avoid or not encounter a salmonella problem, and they're all based off of peer-reviewed articles. So the first recommendation is that wet tomatoes at higher temperatures got infected by salmonella faster than any other experimental group in an experiment. Therefore, when tomatoes are being distributed, they need to be stored and packaged correctly, because incorrect packaging can lead to higher cases of salmonella, which we would like to avoid. Recommendation number 2. A lot of tomatoes carry salmonella because of unsanitary agriculture. Irrigation systems can be contaminated with disgusting water or a lot of bacteria in the water, which carries on to the plant since that's what's being used to grow it. So, with sanitization through overhead spray systems, salmonella can be reduced on tomatoes. Recommendation number 3. Avoiding planting tomatoes and produce in areas that have been previously or ever deemed as contaminated will eliminate the chances of getting salmonella. So if any contaminated plants have grown in a certain area, it's very important to not keep growing plants in that area because contamination could be coming from water in the area, the soil. It can come from anywhere. Step 6. A plan of action. The CDC needs to make a public statement to alert the general public as well as agriculture people and food handlers about the risks of salmonella on tomatoes and what may cause it. This way we can avoid salmonella coming from the very source. This would take about a month for the message to spread. People who work on farms and supermarkets need to change the way they handle tomatoes and their other produce and look at what measures are taken to ensure the cleanliness of tomatoes. Once people get the message from step 1, it's going to take about 3 to 6 months to implement the ideas and actually take more care of their produce. Step 3 is that supermarkets need to start putting out products/promoting products that clean people's produce the right way for them at home, so products that have the correct bacterial killers. Step 7 is conclusions. The CDC took their call to action very fast and eliminated the contaminated tomatoes without having to get rid of all the tomatoes, which is very amazing because tomatoes, again, are such a very common everyday fruit, and without tomatoes, a lot of cultural dishes, a lot of healthy dishes would be taken out, and which we don't want that to happen. An outbreak like this is very important to learn from in order to avoid other produce and everyday foods to get contaminated. And these are my references. Thank you.